Hello. Okay, Chris, all set.
All right, thank you, Barb. I would like to call to order the October 12th, 2020 meeting of the Operations Work Group. Thank you everyone for being here. We're going to start off with public appearances. We had no written registrations tonight, but we do have at least one speaker. So Barb, I'll hand that off to you.
Thank you. One moment. Speaker's name is Andrew Wadey. He's connecting now.
Good afternoon. I'm speaking tonight as the elected president of Madison Teachers Incorporated, the certified bargaining agent for majority of the employees in MMSD, a union that consistently recertifies with high percentages, demonstrating widespread trust and respect for our work. My remarks could end with this following statement: approve a 1.81% cost of living adjustment for all staff, please. It really is that straightforward. Your employees should receive this adjustment, not raise, and your work on the budget for the 2021 school year should reflect that. Of course, I won't stop there because no teacher can resist the opportunity to provide a body of evidence to support our assertions. A few additional points to consider. We all know these are uncertain times. This is abundantly clear to all of us every day as we navigate virtual teaching, working in support of our students. However, even with the many unknowns, MMSD consistently budgets extremely conservatively, and we see the results as the reserve continues to grow. I should add that conservatism doesn't apply equally, and we see administrative costs continuing to rise consistently. How can this be justified to employees who are giving their all during these pandemics? A significant amount of money was saved by the district with health insurance changes that employees agreed to, with the understanding that the money saved would allow the district to invest in needed actions, including investments in our staff. These uncertain times mean more expenses for staff as well. Buying second monitors, upgrading internet access, and other costs are mounting. The workload for staff is magnified under current conditions. We're all first-year employees this year and working together to do our best for our students. Need evidence that staff is under financial stress? MTI has distributed over $70,000 in Solidarity Fund loans to our members since March, and this number continues to grow. Not to be redundant, since you've heard me say this multiple times over the past years, but cost of living adjustment isn't a raise. It simply keeps wages and salaries close to the escalating cost of living. No COLA equals a pay cut. The fact that we're engaging in this discussion yet again is a source of frustration for staff. If you truly value staff and respect the work they're doing on behalf of our students and our community, you'll continue to find ways to demonstrate that. For any individual staff member, the 1.81% adjustment may seem to be a relatively small amount, but it definitely sends a message that we're heard, seen, and appreciated. Thanks for all you're doing. Good night, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wadey. Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers, Barb?
Okay, Chris, no other speakers. Ready for the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next up is approval of minutes. I move that the minutes from the Operations Work Group public input session dated June 15th, 2020 be approved. Can I get a second?
Second, Gloria.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. All right, motion carries 7-0. All right, next minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting dated June 15th, 2020.
Second, Sabian.
Thanks. All those in favor, aye. Motion carries 7-0. And finally, I move to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting. Oh, Barb, should we go ahead with this one? It doesn't look like they're posted.
Yeah, deferred to next meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, that concludes the approval of the minutes. So on tonight's agenda, we have two major discussion items. The first and big one is the 2020-2021 budget. We are a couple of weeks away from the October 26th regular board meeting, when we are scheduled to approve this budget and our tax levy for this school year. This is our last chance in a work group meeting to talk about the budget, ask questions, get clarifications. So I strongly encourage you to ask the questions and pursue the discussions we need to have so that we're ready to vote in a couple weeks when we meet next. The second agenda item is a virtual learning update with a focus on operations. There are no immediate action items coming out of that agenda item. However, there are things we will be talking about that could show up on future consent agendas. All right, so let's launch into the budget. We're going to hear about enrollment. We're going to get updated enrollment information for this school year. And I just want to let folks know that we have an in-depth discussion about enrollment scheduled for the November 9th operations work group meeting. So we will have an opportunity to dig more deeply into what's going on with enrollment and where we might be headed. Tonight's discussion is really meant to be talking about what we're seeing with enrollment and what that means for our budget this school year and this fiscal year. We're going to see an operated revenue forecast and updated expenditure decisions that we're going to need to make, both under passing and non-passing budgets. And we're going to get a tax update. There will be 3 pause points during this presentation after slide 11, which we'll pause to ask questions and talk about revenue. After slide 14, we'll pause to ask questions and discuss expenditures. And then there will be time for questions and discussions at the end. Please hold your questions until those 3 pause points. Any questions before we get going? All right, I will hand things over to Kelly. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Barb, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slides. And Dr. Jenkins, do you want to kick us off with the opening remarks at all?
I believe you're on mute, sir.
Thank you. I want to just thank our entire team for the way that they've worked so diligently under the leadership here of Ms. Rupel. And the team has just really come together to try to put forth the best budget, giving a lot of uncertainty that we know for sure. Some things we tried to predict, and then still in trying to predict, as we all know, we're in a land of uncertainty. So Ms. Rupel will take you through the 2 items that were mentioned by Ms. Carusi, and then at those pause points, if they're at that point, if you want to make any comments or so, we would greatly appreciate it, as we're still trying to work to finalize this budget. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Let's get started. So we'll go ahead and look at our meeting objectives for the night. We are in the October operation work group. Our goals for tonight, as they would be for any operation work group in October, is to get ready for your final vote at the end of the month. So at this time of year, we move a number of our estimates to actuals. And then that gives us the ability to sometimes make new decisions or to revisit old decisions. For tonight, on the revenue side, we have a final enrollment number for you, which does lead into our revenue limit and our overall resources that are available. On compensation, we'll discuss, I will update you with the information that we have in the budget to date. But because we're still in negotiations with MTI, we will not be talking about base wage tonight. We'll just let you know where our budget is currently balanced at. And on open enrollment, we have final numbers. Those numbers create an expenditure of which we need to balance, so we'll talk about that. And last but not least, we'll wrap up with the final tax implications for our taxpayers. An estimate on state aid. We will not receive final state aid until next week. So all of the numbers will remain estimates until we receive the final state numbers, and then equalized property values is a final number. So I'll talk about that as we go through, just for clarity, that some things are still estimates and some things are final as we continue to move forward at this point in time. We will, of course, also reconfirm our passing referendum final decisions as well. So moving into the next slide, I want to really make sure we're all grounded in kind of a reminder of where we've been. I don't know about you all, but last January feels like 10 years ago for me. And so I really want to make sure we spend a little bit of time reminding ourselves of the work we did between January into June. And the reason for that is our entire work that we're doing in October is to update the June budget. All those important decisions that we made leading up to the June vote are just as critical now as they were back then. And the work we did together leading into January was led with educational equity in mind. And I want to make sure we keep that first and foremost in our continued decision-making today. Together, we put equity first. Our June budget, as it still stands, maintains investments for our students. Our behavioral health in schools was expanded in June and is operating now today already. Welcoming schools was passed in June and is expanded and operating in our schools today. In addition to that, we made over $1 million in special education investments already. That has been implemented and is in our schools today. You've already approved the 4K full day planning budget. That is in existence today. So the equity decisions and putting equity first, you've done thus far already in the budget, making very important decisions. Go ahead, Barb, next slide. On the strategic framework, we put the strategic framework and the goals of the strategic framework forward. Together, we had budgeting goals and principles that are in the appendix to this slide if you want to revisit them. Those goals and principles remain just as important today as they were back in June and as they were in January when we discussed and agreed upon them. So putting those goals and first and foremost, our strategic framework and our equity vision today as we make these final decisions still remain critically important. And on the next slide, our timeline can help us revisit where we've been together. So we entered January knowing we had an $8 million deficit. We knew that back in January, pre-COVID. We knew that the state wasn't going to fund what we needed to invest in here in Madison. And so we had to make difficult decisions together. We had to put our strategic equity projects first. I just named a few of them. And then we had to make difficult decisions to balance this budget. Before COVID even hit, we had to make the decision to reduce 60 full-time positions from this budget, including $1 million from central office. We looked at our healthcare savings plan. We redid our entire healthcare plan to identify savings available in this budget, which are then now available today for you to make additional decisions around our expenditures on. Together, in June, we passed a balanced budget. In June, we had difficult conversations around needing to put a pause on compensation while unknowns remained at the state level. Those unknowns remain largely unknown still today. We still could be facing a state repair bill, budget repair bill in the December and January timeframe. We still need to keep that in our first and foremost in our mind. But in addition to that, the COVID itself remains an unknown. Our needs of our students in our schools remain largely unknown. We're going to need to remain flexible throughout the year on our budget to make sure that we continue in every decision we make throughout the year to put students and health and safety first. And that those are things that remain critically important for our decision making in October. So in the next slide, we'll jump into revenue, but we have a disciplined way of working together and we'll continue to follow that tonight. Keeping our goals and our guiding principles first and at the foremost, we'll walk through revenue, we'll go through expenses, and we'll finalize with the impact that has on our taxpayers. So looking at revenue, on the graph that you see on this next slide, we met in September, and together, we decided to build that $179 per pupil back into the budget. That was a conversation we had in September. That $179 per pupil isn't even in the change that we got the year before. The unstable revenue coming out of the state is one of our challenges we face today and it will remain a challenge we face in the upcoming years, particularly in light of COVID. But with that $179 built in, it's on a per pupil basis, which makes our enrollment numbers even more important. When you look at the next slide here, this would be a slide you saw back in the February-March timeframe. Back then, we were already projecting a declining enrollment. It's very important to remember, because even without COVID, we have to be making proactive thoughts around our enrollment projections for the future. These numbers are driven by birth rates, things that we don't have a ton of control over. I'll hand it over to Andrew in just a minute. I want to cover a couple more slides first to answer, to update you on some of the enrollment pieces. But it's Barb, can you go back one more slide? It's important to know that the 51 students, we built into our budget projections already going into March. And the couple of years of student loss before then, we built into the June budget, generating some of the staffing decreases we had to make from a couple of years of enrollment decline starting to build up on us. Preparing for our future, with or without COVID, will remain important for our decisions as these declining enrollments are likely to exist from the birth rate alone. Now, Barb, if you go to the next slide, then COVID hit. And we knew this year wasn't going to look like last year. But in June, when we balanced our budget, we kept enrollment stable. We kept that March projection stable because we didn't know what enrollment was going to look like. Andrew's team did a really great job of putting our survey out to our families, asking them where they thought they might be going in the fall. And at that point in time, our families told us that about 3% of our families would likely choose other options if we remained in virtual learning for the fall. We knew that was a possibility going into this fall. That possibility has now actualized itself with 3.7% enrollment drop, or about 1,000 students. It is important to recognize that about 50% of these students are 4K and kindergarten students, as our survey would have indicated. So because of the survey over the summer, we had the opportunity to plan for this already. And we did that. We did that when making staffing decisions July through August, and when we chose to freeze our vacant positions. So because of those very important decisions that were made, we're at a point now where we are prepared to balance the budget, knowing our enrollment numbers, and we don't need to be making major shifts at the school level because our team has been working to plan for if this were to happen, how we would respond. So the good news here, or maybe the silver lining, is that schools where they are fairly stable. And I'll invite Lisa up here just in a minute to speak to that, some of the work that she does with the chiefs. On open enrollment, our open enrollment has declined, and that is driven entirely by COVID. If you look at the trends over the last 5 years, our open enrollment rates have been incredibly stable and easy for my office to project. We were on an upward trend over time on open enrollment, meaning more students were enrolling in MMSD in any given year than enrolling out until this year. Largely driven by some of the same factors we received out of the survey, we had a number of families choose to enroll in other districts. McFarland is a district who has had virtual learning for a very long period of time. We lost a number of our open enrollment students to McFarland's virtual learning school. Something we knew when we made the decision to go virtual this fall, we knew was a possibility. On the open enrollment side, however, this is a direct expense from our budget because we don't get any new revenue limit authority. So I'll talk about that again when we get to the expense side of things. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Andrew to just give us a little bit more information on our enrollment trends as he's seeing them. And then Lisa, I'm going to ask you to jump in to talk about the great work your team is doing in responding to enrollment as it relates to school allocations. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. As Chris said at the outset, we've got a full report headed to the board during work group on the 9th. So just wanted to share a few things because we know that we've got some curiosity. This has been a very unusual year, and Kelly has already highlighted a few of these things. We did have part of the packet this evening, an information paper, just kind of letting folks know what we know today, and we're going to be doing some further investigation leading up to that November 9th conversation. We don't need to switch over to that on screen here, but it is in the packet for the evening. I'll just offer a few additional highlights. The decline that we saw for actual enrollment counts this time, as Kelly indicated, was in part foreseen when we had asked families what their plans were. So it was not a complete surprise to us. What we were able to do, beginning with the enrollment window opening in August through just a few days ago in terms of updating the content on this information paper, was look at the data that we have for each and every student that we had previously enrolled in the district to make a determination of where they ended up. So these are where those comments then are gathered together, and we find that the number one reason why students would no longer be with MMSD is that they'd moved to another district within the state. A number three reason being open enrollment, which you see here on screen. And then a mixture of private parochial and homeschooling accounting for about 10% or 11% of the students that were no longer with the district. What we're going to do between now and November 9th is take a look at what we might be able to learn about students that had not yet enrolled with MMSD. It's very easy for us to find the data for those students who had previously enrolled with us. But for those students that may be taking a break from 4K because it is optional, or waiting to enroll a brand new kindergartner to the district, we're going to try to figure out what additional information we can there. So there is a lot of information available in the open enrollment program that is a state-run program, and we do have a lot of detail on every student that comes in and out of the district via this program. So some good news, as Kelly pointed out, we do have more enterers this year than we'd had in previous years, up by 56. Good news, bad news, though, we did have more leavers this time. So just over 200 students opting for neighboring districts or virtual districts. So the net effect is 145 student count reduction. But some interesting note here is even under COVID conditions, we actually had 58 fewer net leavers. So we are actually 58 students to the good even this year. So this dynamic of ever increasing open enrollment enterers over these last 2 years has really helped us out in that regard. So we still have to tease out, where possible, this distinction between students who may have left the district for virtual in particular versus in-person education at another district. So we're going to dig in a little bit more on that and see how that split breaks out between now and November. So those are the highlights from that information paper. As I said, we knew there'd be curiosity and wanted to provide something early. We've got a little more work to do, but I'm around if you have any questions later on. Thank you.
Lisa, do you have anything to add regarding the work your team is doing?
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Andrew. My team, which consists of Karen, myself, John Harper, Sylvia, and Teresa Carranza from OMGE, we meet every morning and we monitor enrollment across the district. I would also say that includes our 4K enrollment, as Colleen joins us for that. And interestingly enough, as Kelly has said, things have actually been pretty stable across the district. We have only moved 2 teachers from one school teaching assignment to another. And what happened was actually, as Kelly predicted, those numbers were in the primary grades where our enrollment was very, very low. And we moved those 2 FTE to classrooms that were well above the class size policy. So all of that has been coordinated through HR with the teachers and with the principals. Things have gone very smoothly, and we're happy to say that any adjustments were minimal this year.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. I appreciate that. And many thanks to the great work of your team. Moving on to the next slide, kind of pulling all this together as we look at revenue together before we move into expenses. So what does this all mean? Well, first of all, when we talk about expenses kind of moving forward, we always need to make sure we're talking about reoccurring revenue versus one-time revenue. As we fund staffing positions or salaries tied to staffing positions, 83% of our budget is tied to human capital. Those are reoccurring budgets, and they require reoccurring revenue sources. So from a reoccurring revenue source perspective, that $179 per pupil that I mentioned at a full enrollment would generate about $4.8 million. We talked about that in September. That would then be available for expenditures based on the fact that we've decided to add it back in since June. Just talked about our enrollment. The students and seats enrollment that Andrew just talked about is a bit different than the way it's calculated for budget perspectives. The state has a formula that they use, and they actually call it membership instead of student, but it's a 3-year rolling average. A 3-year rolling average helps us in a year like this. It means that this lower 1 year is helped by an offset of 2 years ago having a higher number. So that 3% and a 3-year rolling average is really 1% student loss or member loss for this particular year. That helps us for this year. For next year, it will make it more difficult than this year to close that budget gap, because you will have a lower number this year, potentially a lower number next year, holding down the overall average. So it's important to kind of think about that as our budget goals for multi-year budget thinking come into play. As I mentioned, the enrollment loss for this year is offset really within its own box at this point. And that's offset by the fact that we've generated a declining enrollment exemption from the state, which is really a one-year save built into the state law. I imagine a number of districts will trigger the declining enrollment exemption this year. In addition, we've made that really good decision on freezing positions, so we're not overstaffed at this point. The savings generated from those vacant position freezes and the declining enrollment exemption will balance that piece of the budget. If we go back into person at some point and we need to unfreeze some of those positions, we will be able to do that. We'll manage the budget on an ongoing basis between now and the end of the year, taking continuous pulse checks to decide where and when we can unfreeze those positions when we need to. In September, we did decide not to add any additional budget authority from their special education reimbursement aid. Turns out to be a very good idea, because the estimates we got from the state just a couple weeks ago showed very little increase at all. Certainly not the $3 million we had projected back in January. Local factors without a new operating referendum. The only additional funds, in addition to the $4.8 million, is the repurposed savings that we received from your all very good decision making back in June. That's the $1 million in healthcare that we agreed in June we would hold on. We bring that back to the table for reallocation, and $500,000 in interest rate savings that you all generated based on our credit rating results. So overall, that would give us the $6.3 million that we'll talk about in just a minute on the expense side. But as a reminder, again, we have already closed a revenue gap of $8 million in this budget deficit in this budget just to get to where we are today. So it's incredibly important for everyone to remember the history and where we are before making final decisions. So, Chris, I think you wanted to pause here if I'm correct.
That is correct. Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate all this good information. Barb, could we go back to regular view just so I can see people to facilitate the discussion? Thanks. And if anybody wants the slides up, please feel free to request them. So revenue, what questions do you have? Clarifications, comments, anything you want to discuss? I have a couple of questions, Kelly. The first one is, one of the areas where we've lost revenue that you didn't mention is Title I. And I'm wondering if you could, Title I funds benefit our high poverty schools and students. And I'm wondering if you could say a few words about how we're continuing to meet the needs of those schools and students given the cut in federal Title I aid.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit, but Lisa, I know, has a lot to say too on Title I. So we lost about $150,000 in Title I funding from the state this year, which kind of continues a trend of loss for the last couple years. And so every year when we notice that, we do everything we can to kind of protect school budgets and reallocate from any central pool when we can. And that's exactly what we had to do this year to protect schools' budgets. But certainly as Title I starts to decrease, the buying power from the schools is not keeping up with inflation. And Elisa, do you have more to add?
I would say that, yes, I think as inflation and rising salaries play into a Title I budget, which is where the dollars follow the students, your dollars don't go as far. And I know that we've talked about that in the past. We use average salaries for the different job-alike categories, and then principals allocate their Title I budget in a supplemental way, which is what Title I is. It's supplemental to local funding. Our practice in assigning Title I funds to schools is that we used a tiered approach with all schools at or above the average district poverty level that's measured by direct certification counts. That practice that we have been using, as we add more Title I schools to that roster, what happens is the more schools you have hovering around the average poverty level, the more shallow that funding becomes across the whole sort of swath of elementary schools. So once we know a little bit more exactly about what our carryover is, Jennifer Waldner is masterful at managing that federal grant and maximizing all of the dollars. We will be able to know a little bit more, but the more schools that we add to that designation, the more we have to think about how we use that tiered approach so that the money goes to students who need it the most.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And Chris, it's certainly not the only title source that we went down this year, but it certainly is the source we went down the most.
And it's also the source that's used to add additional staffing to our highest poverty schools. So I think it's important for the board to be on top of what impact this might have on staffing at high need schools. Another question I had, I was wondering if you could explain in a little bit more detail the impact that open enrollment leavers have on our per pupil revenue versus just kids who aren't here. Like, do we get to count them and then lose the money for them? Is that how that works?
Correct. The open enrollment students are included in the membership count. And then we pay the bills kind of out the door to our surrounding districts. The challenge is they're already our students. So they were included in our budget. So it's a new expenditure because we already had the revenue counted. We thought they were going to be here with us.
That makes it a lot clearer. Thank you. I also just wanted to clarify the longer term impact of enrollment loss. So you mentioned, and I think pretty clearly that, next year, this year, because of the 3-year rolling average, it's really just like a 1% cut. But if our enrollment stays flat this year to next year, it's going to feel more like a 2% cut. And I just wanted to add to that it's a 2% cut, but the number of kids doesn't change. Like if our enrollment stays steady from this year to next year, we're needing to serve the same number of kids. We'll be losing several $1 million just because of the rolling average. And I think that's, if we're thinking about the long-term impact of budgeting, our budgeting decisions, I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's kind of the point of the law in the 3-year average is to help districts ease into a lower budget with lower kids, right? It's not meant to give you more budget when you have less kids. The point is to let you ease in to a lower budget. So it's meant to give you a lower budget in year 2 and a lower budget in year 3, such that your spending per pupil evens out to what is perceived to be the correct revenue limit. But they don't want any one district taking too big of a hit in 1 year. And so there's safeguards in place for this very reason. But yes, what it means is that next year it'll be more of like 2%. Ultimately, kind of doubling what it does mean for our budget by next year.
And even if numbers start to go up a little bit, it seems like while this helps you ease in, it isn't all that helpful in easing out.
Right. We won't get rid of this lower number for 3 to 4 years.
Yep. Other questions? Gloria? I know Dicey.
Yeah, I mean, just along the lines of Chris, the long term, I think it would be helpful, maybe not in this discussion, but in the future, what is our long-term plan and vision around enrollment and how we're going to respond to the growth of our districts, our surrounding districts, and how close we have become, right? In just jurisdictional like space. And so want to consider what is our long-term strategy around that? And are we talking to other districts as we become closer and are building our schools closer? Yeah. Any
Thanks,
thoughts
Gloria.
on-
Oh, yes, we will talk about that more in November, Gloria. But just as a reminder, it's one of the key reasons why we have the elementary school in our referendum strategy. We know that we need schools in neighborhoods by kids, or that they're likely to cross the border to a school that might be closer. And that is a scenario that we're looking at in the Oregon school district situation. And it is the reason why we are looking at an elementary school. And certainly where our schools are located needs to be an ongoing conversation. We have other neighborhoods without schools. And to bring kids back, we need to give them a high quality school in their neighborhood.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. I really appreciate that question, and I hope that we can dig into that more on November 9th. Ananda, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kelly, for speaking to the importance of the new school in the South Rim Rock area. This is a neighborhood that it's complicated, and you do see signs of McFarland and Oregon around just because of the close proximity to those two districts. So I appreciate that, and I really hope that we have more conversations on this. As someone that have been paying close attention to what's happening Madison, Dane County, and the state around enrollment, I really appreciate both the presentation and the way which Andrew also posed the sort of the research analysis. Many districts across the state were already anticipating a lower enrollment, and we at the state were still like, trying to figure out like what is happening for districts and the impact for Wisconsin. I do think that the way in which people are talking about is also very strange, because my understanding of like children enrollment is a family chooses a school and pretty much stays in that school district or in that school for a long period of time. I think that is no longer something predictable as used to be. I know I've talked to colleagues both in other boards, from other boards in Dane County and around the state, that they're saying, people are signing their kids for one semester in one school, another semester in another school, because of just in the space of trying to make decisions for their children. And so I'm curious about how we are negotiating that, and maybe it's just more of a comment than necessarily like a question. But I do wanted to share with my colleagues that like I think we're all like sort of navigating and trying to understand that, like how do you predict trends when you see a very different landscape that we haven't seen like ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly, go ahead.
Andrew and I are all over that. We've had multiple meetings on that exact topic ourselves. And by the time we get to November, we'll talk to you about a little bit about how we think we might aim to try to estimate or predict the following year, or at least our initial thoughts on it.
Thank you. I think one way, and we've been, I feel like I have had those conversations with Lisa before around really strengthening our narrative around virtual learning, right? Like, how do we say, like, yes, we have been planning for virtual learning for quite some time. Yes, we have learned a lot about virtual learning. We had a lot of, missteps, but we are showing up fall 2020 much stronger. We will continue to strengthen our virtual learning accessibility, in particular because there is a lot of uncertainty about what's fall of 2021, or I'm sorry, spring of 21 will look like, summer 21 will look like. So I think the more that we can strengthen that, that narrative, I think it's important. And I think it's also important in the parallel work around supporting our staff and also our families as they're navigating. I think our children are trying to navigate the space and having all sort of opinions about it in ways, if we can find ways to also tap on them and always be asking how can we improve. I think that's really, I know my daughter, like almost every week she tells me the report of what's happening in her classroom that week and which teacher is doing amazing, which teacher is still learning and whatnot. But like, I think as we're expanding and moving into 2021 with continued uncertainties, it's like, how do we create those parallel plans to continue to support and then strengthen our narrative around virtual schools? And Lisa, I know you had your camera on there.
No, now, Ananda, thank you for saying that. I think that your comments were right on, and we're continuing to think about how to best communicate and what to communicate that's most meaningful and that will most specifically focus on our students who have been historically underserved. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you. I have two more comments. One is, how are we going to stretch our capacity to serve our students with IEPs? I know, like almost every week I hear some, just a lot of things happening all over the state around that, like challenges around we were not serving our students to the best way before COVID, and now COVID added a different dynamic. And then our English learner students, which adds to the complexity around being accessible via language, and commending our team on this great work. I have one more question, and I don't know if this is the right time, Kelly, but I know we had talked in the past, I think over the summer, you had a sort of a running list of COVID related, unexpected budget line items. I don't know how you're thinking about, I know you have been just sort of communicating different things, and we have received a pretty extensive conversation around the technology part of it, but I'm wondering, how does that play on this conversation, in particular around the impact of enrollment?
I have a budgetary slide on COVID coming up in a little bit as we get to expenses. So I think that's probably mostly where I'll answer your questions, Ananda. Otherwise, as it relates to enrollment, we certainly believe that the COVID-19 impact is what has caused our enrollment changes. And the question will be the very question you just posed regarding how do we predict next year, when previous prediction patterns probably aren't the best way. And we have great minds working on that. They're calling over to UW to get other people's great minds. And hopefully we'll have an update for you when we meet in November.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Ananda. And I'm jotting down these questions about enrollment specifically so we can get to them in November. Let's see, I saw Christina. Nikki, did you raise your hand too? Nikki and Savian. So Christina, go ahead.
I think they were ahead of me, so
okay.
Go ahead.
Nikki, do you want to go ahead then?
Sure, it's just a very quick comment. I was under the assumption that negotiations with MTI were done to respect those negotiations I'm not going to comment on anything on the budget until things are, well, until negotiations are completed. That's why I am not participating other than to listen to gain knowledge and information. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Savian, did you want to go ahead?
Maybe Ali was ahead of me. I don't know if you want to hop in.
You all are very polite this evening. I have two really quick questions, and I would like to direct them at Deirdre and Kelly. So first, I'd like to thank you all for all the work you've done to avoid laying folks off. And that has been extensive work, and you all have been really, you've refused to be short-sighted and really navigated this kind of epic moment in history with a great deal of finesse. As far as managing vacancies, can you speak to the number of vacancies we currently have and any reduction in staff need indicated through those vacancies? So maybe a position was thought of as vacant in the spring and is now thought of as no longer necessary. Can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, Kelly, I can dive in here. I think that, Ali, to answer your first question, I don't believe that we have identified any position that we don't need. This is more about what is happening virtually versus what would be happening in person, right? And we currently are looking at about somewhere between 100 and 110 FTE that are currently sort of in that holding place. And so as resignations come up, we're actually looking at all of those holistically and making decisions about what could we release based on what the need is. So there is sort of this number of vacancies that we have to maintain in order for Kelly to be able to, stay within our budget and manage. So we're being very thoughtful and mindful about that. But as it relates to positions that have been identified that wouldn't be needed, we currently don't have any that are on our list that would fit that category or criteria.
Yeah, that's right. I would say though that category would have been the 60 FTE that we mentioned positions we closed back in June under kind of the previous intern superintendent.
Thank you for speaking to that. A follow-up question around that is vacancies at central office. So I know we're seeing significant vacancies across the district. Can you speak to vacancies at the administrative level?
Yeah, so at the same time, we're looking at all of that together. So vacancies that might be at a school level in addition to central office, and again, making some decisions. I think one of the things that's really important is there are certain positions that certainly as central office is looked at being in service of schools, if we were not able to fill those positions, we would not be able to be as strong of a team and serve our schools as well. So we're making decisions to backfill those positions based on that particular vacancy and the support that it provides to the school specifically.
Yeah, so for example, our tech team, we've filled those vacancies. We can't be short our tech staff right now. All of our work hinges on them. Our nurses, those positions, we're hiring right away. We need them and more support as we get ready for in school, in person at some point in time. So, we have to make decisions based on the virtual learning model, and that's what's driving.
Thank you so much for speaking to those questions, y'all, and thank you for all the work that you've done to ensure that our staff are secure within their roles.
Thanks, Ali. Savian, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the presentation thus far. Just looking at some of the data, am I right in interpreting the enrollment out was kind of disproportionate at the 4K and K level?
Correct.
Are there any ways that we can remain in contact with those families? Or
Andrew, go ahead.
We do have contact information from them for those families that have consistently kept their email, for example, we would have the ability to use that contact info. And one of the things we're trying to do is figure out when we can ask families, when would be a good time to ask them if they have open enrolled, what were the reasons for it? So in a lot of these cases, we'll only know when we ask. So trying to find the right window to ask those questions. We would not have those answers by November 9. Our preliminary conversation suggests that it would be better to ask after a period of time to make sure the families are actually going to stay or come back. We could see families moving back and forth. So we don't purge any of that information. So as long as it remains current, it remains usable. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it'd be, helpful to know if the reasons were just COVID or other reasons, and things we can do to help them enroll back into the district, especially those younger families. Real quick, you mentioned the 1 million in budget cuts from central office. Could you, I guess, Deidre and Kelly, just run through what those included and if we found any opportunities to kind of collapse and spread out either frozen positions or, just general cuts?
So the $1 million that I mentioned earlier was central office staff positions. I don't have the list right in front of me right now. I can email it to the board. But they were staffing positions. In addition to that, there's other non-personnel budget cuts kind of across the district at like contracted services and whatnot that led to the entire $8 million. It's all in the June budget book as well, but
right.
We can get you the positions if that's what you're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for all of this information and the work that's been done on this. I guess my question also revolves around the next enrollment conversation that we're going to have. And in addition to what Gloria and Ananda said about maybe making sure that we're taking a really comprehensive look at our enrollment at that time. And I know we keep going back to the birth rate as being one of the factors that influences our enrollment rates, but taking a larger look at the things that Gloria mentioned as far as schools near boundaries and what Ananda said about the services that we are providing, in virtual learning and, going forward to back when we're in person. And so I look forward to that conversation in November. And I guess just for the graph too, I'm wondering if we can get a graph that is actually not just the net on this, but and maybe I can talk to Andrew about that, but I found it a little hard to decipher the actual trends out of that graph. So maybe not quite sure what my recommendation would be around that, but I'll think about that a little bit more. I had a question, given that our enrollment numbers are down really low at the 4K and the K level, most impacted, and also the elementary, do we right now have really low class sizes at those levels around the district, or how's that looking?
Yeah, this gets back to what Lisa said earlier. Lisa, feel free to jump in if you need more, but we predicted this, right? We predicted this based on Andrew's enrollment survey. So when we chose to freeze positions, we looked to freeze at the 4KK in some of the early grades, because that is where we predicted some of this. So we may have some low class sizes out there, but largely I think we're kind of right where we thought we might land. Lisa?
I would say yes, we do have some low class sizes out there, Kelly, but we, as you and I have talked and Deirdre talked, we made the overarching commitment to not disrupt schools if we didn't have to. Remember, those teachers already in classrooms teaching children. So if there was not a move to need them to move them to reduce class sizes somewhere else, we left them. There. So, I mean, to be real specific, we probably have some kindergarten classes out there at 10 or 11, but because we didn't need that teacher elsewhere, in some cases, we left those. On the flip side of it, and I know it's on your mind, is we have some kindergarten, second grade classrooms that are a little bit higher. And based on the parameters that we set, that we talked with the board about last year, around preserving straight grade classrooms in lieu of jumping into multi-age as a budget strategy. We will see that there are some classes that are a little bit over that as well. And we worked with principals to talk about that, to make sure that their schedules were set. As you know, anytime you add or move a teacher, it also completely impacts master schedules. And for every 1.0 FTE move, it's about a 0.6 of combination of specials FTE that moves as well. So we wanted to be really thoughtful when we talk with principals at all different places across the district in terms of how much disruption would it cause and what other staff members were they using in their school to either bring class sizes down and do small group instruction or move people around, to do some other creative grouping as well.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. And will we talk about that in relation to enrollment next November when we talk in November, do we get a breakdown of that? Like,
no, we won't do class size as part of the enrollment. The enrollment conversation will be digesting the conversation Andrew just talked about and Savion's questions. Where are the kids? Where did they go? What do we need to do about it? Can we get the kids back by January? Can we get them in our January counts? And what projections will we think about using for next year? The class size conversation is always built in. It's part of our standard reporting procedures that Andrew's team will do it and we'll submit it to the board, but it's not intended to be part of the November conversation at this time. The November meeting's pretty packed already.
Kelly, will we be getting that class size report November, December? Do you know?
We can revisit the timeline. I don't have it in front of me right now, but we'll follow our standard timeline.
Okay, thanks. Gloria, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I also want to have a more thorough conversation about the demographics of people who are living in our district. I know that cities across the country, school districts across the country are, they're struggling with this white flight problem, and just wondering if that is, as we become more diverse within our public schools and our city, if that is impacting, what we're seeing, right? I mean, I think, is that something that you're tracking? And if so, it would be great to sort of tell the story around the evolution of our school district and what we are seeing past, present, and into the future.
Sure, we'll take that into consideration for the November analysis.
Any other questions about revenue? All right, Kelly, let's jump into expenditures.
Oh,
all right, Barb, if you could pull the slides back up, that'd be great.
Sorry, Chris, there's one
I'm
more.
sorry, Nanda.
Yes, I'm so sorry. No, I'm sorry. Kelly, I'm trying to, I received some information. I just wanted to get some clarification. Does the formula for accounting is from a DPI perspective, does that count our third count student for special ed, for example? Does it count our third Friday? Does it take into consideration the third count Friday, or is that December numbers?
Yeah, no, the enrollment numbers that I just presented on are driven from the third Friday count formulas.
Mm-hmm.
And then embedded into the membership count is also the summer school membership formulas and the part-time member formulas. So it's more than just the third Friday, but the third Friday counts are the driving numbers. Our next counts with DPI is the second Friday in January.
Mm-hmm.
And if the numbers go up, it could help us with next year's numbers. But this year's budget is baked based on these numbers.
So our reimbursement comes from the third Friday number as a driver.
Our revenue comes from membership count. Driving force of the membership count is the third Friday count.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, let's jump into expenditures.
All right. Barb, if you could pull those slides back up. Excellent. All right. So just a minute ago, if you add those numbers together from the revenue side, we come up with $6.3 million in revenue available for final decision making for October. Based on our conversation in September, we have built into the budget an assumption that we would fully fund steps, lanes, and longevity for staff, and that step, lane, and longevity payment for staff would be kind of back paid to the July 1 timeframe moving forward. So that's an assumption. I'm checking with you today and looking for your validation that would remain in the budget. That then, though, does increase total compensation by 2% on average for every employee, which does exceed the 1.8% cost of living or inflation. So with cost of living kind of covered, as far as the step, lane, and longevity movement goes, it does take up the majority of our new revenue, which does leave us very limited on what we can do for base wage movement. So at this point, base wage does remain at 0 while we are in negotiations at this time. Additional expenditures I've already alluded to. On the open enrollment side, that open enrollment net loss for this year will cost us $420,000, which does need to use the revenue in order to balance that we otherwise would have generated from that revenue limit. And similarly on the food service, back in June, we were looking at a $1.3 million transfer from Fund 10 in order to balance our food service revenue losses due to virtual learning. Thanks to the USDA waiver, we were able to decrease that to $962,000, but it does remain a necessary transfer. It is required that we submit a balanced food service budget at the end of this month. So between the food service transfer, open enrollment, and a $5 million increase to total compensation for staff, that does balance this budget and use all available revenue sources. We have been able to reallocate within budgets to create an additional one-time COVID budget in order to spend it on increased needs. For example, our technology team has already far outpaced the need for a budget for lost, broken devices. Unfortunately, just due to the situation we're in, we're seeing way more lost devices and repairs needed than we otherwise would have projected in a standard year, for example. So areas where we thought we might have any savings in this budget pulled together for a one-time COVID funding budget. I say one time because once we're back in person, those traditional budgets will need to be kind of back to their standard place, utilities, transportation and whatnot once we're back in person. So this is just kind of this 1 year, one-time need in order to make sure that we can overall balance as it relates to our additional expenditures for COVID. And on the next slide, then we start to look at the passing budget. Barb, if you wouldn't mind. I'm sorry, this is a food service slide. It just explains the $962,000 transfer and how we ultimately balance the food service budget. It does rely on a $1.5 million of our CARES Act funding as a revenue source. We've taken additional expenses and reduced food supply and other expenses where we can. We have maintained vacancies in our food service, freezes on our vacancies, and the Fund 10 transfer. They're all needed to balance what is ultimately about a otherwise $3 million budget gap in food service. The USDA waiver is extremely helpful, but it is not enough. So just want to make sure that's clear to everyone. In addition, these assumptions take into place that by October 3rd, we'd be back into some sort of in-person learning model. And if that does not happen by third quarter, we would face additional food service losses, ultimately then having to pull from their fund balance in order to balance. But as in any good budget process, you take what you know from the moment you have it. And at this point, this is what we are thinking are our best estimates on the food service budget and to get it to balance. So the next slide is our passing budget. In addition to the $5 million that we've set aside for steps, lanes, and longevity in the passing referendum budget, we're pleased to be able to build in a 0.5 base wage increase to bring total compensation up to $6.25 million, or a 2.5% average total salary increase for our employees, again, outpacing inflation. So we're happy to do that. And then on the expenditure side, as it relates to our priority projects, these are the same projects you saw back in September, built into the passing version budget, with one new addition, and there's a memo in your packet for the Black Excellence Fund. When we open up for questions, Nichelle is here and available for that, as is Lisa, and as is Deirdre on comp. The Black Excellence Fund, ultimately, between senior leadership team and cabinet and reviewing the great work Nichelle has done to rethink her processes, focus on continuous improvement for the overall fund, and generate ideas already for this upcoming school year. We were super excited to see some of those ideas, and coming out of SLT and cabinet put forward a recommendation to increase the Fund 10 budget, $100,000, in order to give Nichelle funding that can be used for academics. A large portion of that fund right now is Fund 80, which limits the kind of projects that the Black Excellence Fund can invest in. Coming out of the passing budget, then that leaves $2.6 million available. That has been put into a COVID assigned budget for large projects that are needed coming out of COVID-19 that cannot otherwise be funded on this budget. So taking on big projects around air in our schools, for example, is a multi-million-dollar project. Trying to take on-site testing would be a multi-million-dollar project. Trying to extend summer school, if we were back in person by summer, into the kind of the masses of students, or an extended school year look at summer school, would be a multi-million-dollar project. So all of these investments are very large investments that will ultimately need to kind of weigh out against each other or fundraise for in order to accomplish them. But in the meantime, putting a significant amount of funding available so that we can take on some of these bigger projects is a priority, coming out of kind of our senior leadership team in the cabinet, and as we understand it, the board. So with that, I'm going to pause, hand it over to Deirdre to make any additional comments you might have on compensation, and Lisa, anything you might have to add on the priority projects.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I don't have anything really to add on compensation, other than we're happy we are able to build this in as an assumption, and so we are eager to get your feedback and response about that. I mean, as you know, we came into this budget with sort of nothing as that placeholder. So to be able to build this back in, I think is important. And it's an important message and acknowledgement to our staff that we see them and we appreciate and value them. So I'm just looking forward to being able to move forward with that level of approval.
Thanks, Deirdre. And we are going to spend next month in the instructional work group talking about a focus on early literacy, which we believe is essential to giving our students a healthy and strong start to the year. And the components of that focus that we'll discuss more in November includes selecting reading materials with an explicit focus in, first of all, on the science of learning and materials that are built around high quality standards aligned instruction and have that explicit structured phonics approach built in. There's also some budgeted money here around professional development. We want to be sure that we are providing professional learning opportunities for our teachers so they understand the research and the data behind the science of reading. We've also been thinking about a strategy around increasing our highly qualified staff to have that reading certification. And then we talked last week a little bit about a full day 4K pilot. All of those getting after a very explicit focus on early literacy and setting students up for success.
All right, thank you, Lisa. If you actually, did you want to break here, Chris?
This is where I wanted to take our second break.
All right.
So thanks, Kelly. So Barb, if we could go back to being able to see everybody. This is the time to ask questions about our expenditure decisions, both passing and non-passing budgets? Ollie.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to see that there continues to be a commitment to Black excellence and to equity as a district and as an approach to this work. And I think that, you know, really fulfilling the promise of Black excellence requires a level of in-depth commitment to investing in Black excellence. And so I am curious where the $100,000, kind of where that number comes from, and ultimately how that informs our long-term investment in Black excellence. I do think a percentage of every dollar spent should be spent on making sure that we are closing the achievement gap. And so speaking to the equity initiative that is Black excellence, but also speaking to our wraparound approach to equity and the achievement gap as facilitated through this budget.
Sure. Well, certainly, the Black Excellence Fund is not where we start nor stop when it relates to funding Black excellence across the district. So many of the decisions that we make are put forward with closing academic and opportunity gaps in mind. You know, whether it's programming at the schools related to BSU or restorative justice or other leadership programs, our advanced learning investments in just this last budget cycle were all tied to Black excellence. So certainly it's not the end of the Black excellence investments. As it relates to the $100,000, it seemed to be based on the ideas that Nichelle has pulled together with her community partners. It seemed to be what they needed in order to fund the projects they had in mind. They have $250,000 of Fund 80 resources available and $100,000 of Fund 10 money available. And when looking at the ideas and the projects that they put forward, which are included in Nichelle's memo, adding Fund 10 money, which is a more flexible source of money to really look at projects that impact the academic side of the house, was the budget that they needed in order to get that work done. And so knowing how tight this budget is, kind of giving them what they need to be successful without kind of overshooting or leaving any money at the end of the table this year was kind of the goal that we had in mind, but certainly not the end for kind of the long-term impacts of our Black Excellence Fund. Nish, I don't know if Lisa, Deirdre, Nichelle, anyone else wants to add?
I would just add that the work that we're doing around early literacy, moving from talking about Black excellence and talking about anti-racism to actually focusing in and doing something is also a commitment to our students of color. This is an investment in our children, in our families, and in our community. And this is an example of work that brings together anti-racist practices and high expectations, right? Both of those. And I would say that is critical to the work of Black excellence. And it is an imperative that we get after that and not see the two as separate, but see those as coming together to serve all children, giving them that strong foundation and moving forward. So we see that, Ali, definitely is more than just something that happens in primary classrooms. We see this as a real community commitment to that work.
Thank you so much, both of you, for speaking to that. And Deirdre, I think you popped on to add.
I did. Ali, I appreciate the question and the comment. And I do think that it's important for us to also just really acknowledge that this is a starting place, right? I mean, it is important for us to be prioritizing what we see as important. And we have lifted up Black excellence as a strategy. And so our strategy really needs to be aligned and our dollars need to follow the strategy. So I see the Black Excellence Fund and the dollars that are sort of being designated really as a starting point. And we do have opportunity to build on that, but I am appreciative that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, especially in a year with these kinds of budget constraints. And I really do think it's important to say that we cannot afford inequity. My children can't afford for us to balance the budgets on an educational system that produces disproportionate outcomes for young Black people. Dr. Jenkins, I want to thank you very much for your remarks at our last meeting, speaking to our commitment to equity in terms of 4K and really driving home the need for us to prioritize equity and the rights of all students. Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of strengthening Black excellence or what it means for us to move forward in terms of investing in equity?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the question. And Lisa was touching on the part about early literacy. It's actually, when we're looking at early literacy and beyond, we had already made a decision what we were going to do with our elementary curriculum, but then now we made a decision to pause. And so we're going to have more robust conversation relative to everything that we're going to be getting. It's going to be in alignment with what is to be that best practice. And we've been talking about the science of reading, but also giving our staff an opportunity to get the professional development that they need as well. We realize what we've been doing, and this is age long in terms of the reading disparities that we're continuing to see. And we really do believe that this is going to be something that's going to lift up Black children. So when you say it should be intertwined, this is one of those strategies that's intertwined with what we're doing with our funding, but with an intentionality to say, hey, we're guaranteeing we're going to be moving forward with this in terms of reading. That's just one of the things that we're talking about. But when we also, we're already investing in the STEAM program and looking at some of the work that we were doing with Madison College and looking at the number, over 200 students now involved in it, but the number of students, Black students who are involved in that, the young Black women who are involved in that, that's intentionality. And we do have to think about the budget in every kind of way and how we're going to highlight, illuminate those and be very intentional instead of just saying throwing general dollars out there and continuing to perpetuate the inequities that we're talking about. We have to put it out there and be able to measure it, to be able to turn it back to some of the questions the taxpayers are asking us. Guarantee me how we're going to do this to benefit my child as well. And so thank you for that question, but we're going to continue to have those discussions. I appreciate Lisa's leadership with the team about that intentionality too on this particular topic.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Dr. Jenkins. My last comment is I just want to thank Nichelle Nichols for all the work that she did to create phenomenal projects and opportunities for our young people last year. It was really agile work. I see you over there, Nichelle. And given what happened with COVID, kind of in the first year of Black excellence, you handled the situation masterfully and really relied on some incredible community partners who we cannot thank enough. So huge shout out to Umoja Magazine and all of the other partners who have informed this work and work to benefit our kids as a collective. Thank you so much, Nichelle.
And Chris, if I have a final comment here on Nichelle. Nichelle said something in one of our team meetings that's just stuck with me. This work of Black excellence doesn't just belong to Michelle and her department. It belongs to all of us. We must embrace it from the board level down to any other staff person that we have, from our community cares program, community child care program, everyone. And Nichelle, I wanted to tell you publicly, thank you for having the courage to say that, and everyone should be accountable for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. Are there other questions or comments about revenue? Sorry, expenditures. Christina.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment and say thank you again to everyone, to Kelly, to everyone who's been working on the budget for keeping us focused and flexible in this incredible degree of uncertainty that we've been working through with this budget over this past year. It's just been a real challenge. And I think by taking the cautious approach that we did, it has allowed us to be able to make the adjustments that were needed due to COVID-related expenses and enrollment changes, while still being able to make our investments that we wanted to in strategic equity projects and staff compensation. And so I really, looking at that slide, particularly on what a passing referendum expenditures would be, I'm really excited about every piece of that, because to me, it feels really comprehensive and gives us a good vision going forward for our priorities and how we're looking to invest in students to move forward. My question is around the reading materials and the investment. Not looking at the slide, $300,000 for the investment in professional development, I believe, and the $150,000 for that focus on 4K, 5K transition. How many staff does that get us towards, providing professional learning for? And I know this is going to be a multi-year investment and probably just not 1 year, but can you give us a little indication of like future investments that might be needed to continue this work as we get started?
Sure, Chris, I think that's an important question. We'll share more about what we think a phased approach will be moving forward. We already have, right, some early adopters, some pioneers out there at some schools that are trying this. And we're going to learn from those people moving forward. I think we will have to continue this professional development every year for a group of people. I was telling someone the other day in a meeting about early literacy, we want this to be stock PD that all of our new teachers go through before they step foot in a classroom and before they actually interact with students. So I think we will always have a need for this professional development. I would anticipate an investment over multiple years will be significant. And I think that the board and our curriculum and instruction team will have to make some decisions about how we want to continue that commitment, because I do believe it's a commitment that will pay off. We have some data, Chris, that we can share with you also about a cohort of folks that have already been trained in letters and that have already been trained in other research-based curriculum and strategies, so we can share more with you about that at the next meeting. This is obviously a cross-functional priority project that will take not just us, right? We need to do this in collaboration with our community, with experts in the community, with researchers. And I know Carlton and I have been talking about a task force actually that can work with us in this and, point out where our blind spots are, where we have gaps and where things are going well and where we need to adjust. So we anticipate lots of voices being part of this work as well, but then very focused action. Dr. Jenkins, if you'd like to add anything to that, please chime in.
One of the other things, and Chris, Lisa alluded to, that we're going to have this task force, because as we're doing this, this is an opportunity to educate our entire community around the science of reading, not just our staff. We want to educate our parents. We want to work with the university professors. We want to work with the leading individuals around the science of reading. We've already contacted the reading lead. We've talked to professors at the universities. We're bringing individuals not who are just drinking the Kool-Aid, so to say. We want to also bring in individuals who can challenge our thinking about this and bring empirical evidence. As what we've looked at to date, I'm talking about years and years of data, it has not done exactly what Ali was saying here. It has not peeled out incredible results for all students. Some students, with what we have right now, they're gonna thrive, I'm telling you. But when we're looking at things with an equity lens, it hasn't been something that's been for all children. And I'm talking about our ELL students. I'm talking about Black children. I'm talking about white children. I'm talking about poor children, special ed children. This is what we're trying to do with this. So Lisa, again, her department, their leadership around this whole piece has been phenomenal. We've had staff that we've talked to as well who are for it. And then we have some who have questions. And this is going to be something that we see as being transformative for our district. So this is a real investment over time. So I can't tell you today that it's going to cost $50, because over time, it may be a little bit less than the $1 billion we probably already put into what we know doesn't work. right? But I can't tell you that it's going to be $50, so for sure.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that more comprehensive view of what you're working on and your vision for how this is going to be transformative in our district. I really appreciate that. I just have one more question for Nichelle, and I assume Nichelle, I don't see you on there. There she is. Hi, Nichelle. I'm excited about this $100,000 investment being targeted towards instructional and giving you more opportunities to grow opportunities for students. I'm curious, your group that you have been working with, the coalition and the think tank, how are things going this year as you sort of navigate virtual engagement like everybody else? And is there still the enthusiasm around this work that I have previously seen exhibited at previous meetings?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. So a couple of things. One is, as you can imagine, with the reopening of schools virtually, been waiting to hear more from our families, from our students, from our staff who are hearing really the emerging ideas and issues that would be important for us to address with these funds. So to Dr. Jenkins' point around really being strategic about using our funding, we wanted to use these first few weeks of school to really allow some of those emerging issues to come back to us. And while some of those ideas and thoughts have been coming in, it has been helping me think about the request for proposal language, right? So that we can clearly identify what those priority areas and focus would be with our community partners, as well as on the instructional side. And so I've really needed kind of the opening of school to be the runway for me to better understand how to use these funds more strategically. I'm in the final phase of writing kind of the drafted language, and then I will reconvene our think tank group. So they've kind of been waiting for me, right? They've been like, hey, Nichelle, like, what's going on? And I had said, give me a little bit more time because we really want our process to be transparent. We want it to be strategic, and it must meet the needs of our students and families. So now that I have a better pulse on that, I'll be reconvening our think tank group. We'll be getting our coalition meetings going again, which are really mostly family members, right? Raising Black students in the district, so getting that family feedback. And one of the other ideas that we have is we've been working this last year with a group called the Youth Voice and Vision Group. And they have been high school students from across our district. And they have really expressed wanting their voices to actually impact change and decision making. And so I'd also like to bring our RFP language to that group to help us really think about, is this the right language and the right priorities to put out to the community on how we plan to use these funds? So I'll have a little bit more to share in the next 6 weeks as we get ready to issue the RFP language. But I'm really excited by the opportunities to be strategic and really thinking about just the ordinary experiences that families are having right now, managing children in virtual learning, them managing work, and what our students are saying they could use. And so I'm excited by the opportunities. And to Ali's point earlier, you know, our community partners stepped up in a big way last year as we were piloting implementation of these funds. We learned a lot together. And I think the diligence that's being used or that I have right now to make sure that we've got some real clear priorities is going to pay off for our continued partnership. So I think there's as much enthusiasm out there, Chris, but I'll know in the next few weeks as I get people back to the table.
All right. Thanks, Nichelle.
All right, I saw Savian had his hand up.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I just wanted to make a few comments and then ask two questions. I just remember back in June expressing how disappointing our budget looked because of COVID, but also a hope and intention to build it back up. So I just really want to thank the whole team for working together with the board, with staff and community partners to position our budget to, strategically invest in students, addressing inequity and compensating our teachers. It is good to see steps in some level of COLA reincorporated into the budget. Our staff are doing so much and are working harder than ever. So it's good to see them rise to the occasion during COVID. We got our annual report at the regular board meeting last month. And when we look at the literacy rate for our Black students, especially our Black students with disabilities, that says it all about why these early reading investments are so necessary. Moving to the 4K level and really trying to prioritize that in terms of addressing enrollment, and where our drop in enrollment came from this year, it's even more critical than when we added that to the budget in January in the early stages. Dr. Jenkins, a little bit, I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit about what a partnership would look like with UW or other partners on incorporating a new reading curriculum and trying to position the science of reading to address our failure to teach Black kids how to read.
Well, when I interviewed, I talked about bringing the science from the hill down to the practice of what we're doing day to day. And it's just that a partnership, because I think as practitioners, what we're doing every day, we can really inform what's happening in the science. But you do have some individuals right here who are sharing parking lots with us. And we've been in conversation at this point with a number of them. Dean Hess, I have to give her a lot of credit. She is in there, both feet in. And then some of the professors who are over there, and I won't name them all right here, but they are willing to at least engage in this discussion. This has been a huge discussion at UW for a long time. When I attended there, before I attended there, it's been a huge discussion in the city of Madison and Madison Metropolitan School District. But now we're talking about bringing the practitioners with the scientists to the table and allowing what's the best of empirical evidence to lead us. And we are just trying to give the professional development with some support from the university to our district, and also having some of our own staff becoming really astute at what the science is telling us about this and what are going to be the best practices to transform our district. But even a step further than that, partners in our community. So we talk about looking at Central, when we're talking about the Urban League, when we're talking about other programs in our community partners, this is a time we put the schools in the communities and the communities in the schools. And so we have various training programs. I don't care if it's one city school. If we're training for early literacy, individuals in our community who are our children are in their care, we want to educate our entire community and engage them, not just educate, engage them in this critical discussion to put forth what we say can be the best thing for all children in the city of Madison. So that's just a gist of it, but they're participating. We will meet, and a number of them have already committed to putting their resources, doing the research, doing the audits for us, helping monitor as we put the metrics in place. We don't want to just do something. We want to measure it as it goes along, be able to report it out, be able to write about it, and be able to shape our professional development. So I'm hoping that we can get a lot of professional development just from some of the professors over there at a very, very low cost to us.
Thank you. It's so important. And it's not exclusively just for Nichelle, but can we talk about with the new Black Excellence Funds and we can continue to do work to making sure our curriculum is reflective of our students' own teachers of color. I'm not sure if you can hear me still.
Can you repeat that one more time? It was kind of coming in and out.
I'm sorry, but how we can really leverage our Black Excellence budget to make sure our curriculum isn't whitewashed and reflective of the students' backgrounds, and how we can really invest in grow your own programs for Black students to become teachers in our school district as well.
Okay. So thank you, Savion. So right now, if the operating referendum passes, the additional $100,000 does include an earmarked amount that we would be using in collaboration with curriculum and instruction on some additional materials around African American history. As you can imagine, my colleagues in curriculum and instruction really lead that work. But certainly these funds, so I've worked with our new curriculum and instruction executive director, Kaylee, to talk about what a line item might be, so that as that department is working more on supplementary materials, the funds would be available. And she has said that although that work is still kind of emerging, they have formed, I believe, a cross-departmental and cross-school group to start to focus on what that might look like. And we don't have an exact dollar amount, but we did earmark some money out of the additional $100,000 if the operating referendum passes. In regards to your second question around grow your own students, was that? I want to make sure I got it right.
Sorry, yeah, building our pipeline really for our own students to become educators in our district, and trying to recruit more Black and Brown teachers. Okay, which is, so, you may remember that we do have a partnership with UW-Madison and the School of Education there, and we have a Grow Your Own program currently called Team Scholars, which is recruiting students of color in particular into a Grow Your Own kind of experience where they will, upon enrolling in a post-secondary education, then apply to be in a school of education with a commitment to become a future educator. At this time, I don't have an earmarked dollar amount on what an additional cost might be to expand Team Scholars or to grow it in a deeper way. But I would be more than happy to follow up with Jen Shepke, who is the director of Ford Madison, and that strand of work kind of falls under her leadership. So, what I like what you're bringing up, Savion, is that you as board members also have ideas about how you'd like to see the funds have impact. And quite honestly, oftentimes I've been asking staff, I've been listening for emerging issues from students, and then we certainly are listening to what families are saying they could use. But you raise a really great point, which is how do board members potentially also want to see the impact of these funds in very strategic ways? So I will follow up with Dr. Jenkins on how we can maybe populate some of your ideas as well. Thank you. Yeah, and just to close up, it's really important that we all, highlight the significance of the referendum and demonstrate the things that we can invest in with these funds, and that we are moving very intentionally to close the equity gaps we see in our district. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions or remarks? Nikki.
Nichelle, thank you for the work. I appreciate that. Your screensaver, your hair keeps fluttering in and out. So I'm seeing half your head.
Thank you, Nikki. I'll lean in a little bit more or try to get my head right.
Sorry, just thought you should know as it's televised that you might not want that that way.
Thank you. I will also say, Nikki, let me just take an opportunity to thank the board again for your investment in this budget process with the Funds for Black Excellence. Again, last school year was our first year implementing programs, partnerships, collaboration with those funds. You did receive and kind of an end of the year report that highlighted some of the great collaborations that we did and the impact that students, staff, and families had because of those investments. And of course, we didn't expect the COVID-19 pandemic. And so even in spite of being sheltered at home, even in spite of uncertain times in our country, we were really proud to be able to implement what we could last year and are looking forward to our strategic focus this year. And now, Nikki, I am also focused on my hair. And so with that being said, let me get off this mic and the video.
Sorry, I would have wanted to know.
All right, Ollie, I saw your hand. Other comments? Ananda, Gloria. All right, I will jump in then. First, I wanted to second Christina's comments about I'm really glad to see investments in Black excellence specific to academics in the classroom. I think that's really important, and I'm glad we're making that move. My understanding of the Black Excellence Fund is that it's really targeted toward innovation. And I'm hopeful that if we do find curricular materials that do a better job of reflecting the culture and background of our students, that we're able to put that into the regular budget and make sure that we normalize that and make that part of what we do in every budget every year. That's where we need to move to. $100,000 is not going to close the achievement gap academically. I have just a couple questions in two big areas. And the first one is about the fund balance. So the past couple of years, we have fortunately been able to roll, I think, the maximum amount that we're allowed to move by our policy into the fund balance. And we went into this pandemic with a very healthy fund balance, which I think was a good thing. I am curious how much flexibility we have in this budget to use that fund balance if we need to use it to respond to specific COVID needs. So for instance, if we are able to get at least some of our kids back to a hybrid model in the third quarter, and we find that we have some class sizes that are too big and we need to hire some temporary staff, do we have flexibility from fund balance or other parts of the budget to do that? Likewise, I know that we have a lot of staff who are using their own money to purchase technology for working at home. Would we be able to use some fund balance to either reimburse staff for some of those costs or give everybody a small stipend to help them cover technology investments for home offices? Just checking in about what flexibility we have to use fund balance for these one-time extraordinary expenses related to COVID. Another one is, you mentioned the air handling system that we would cover in a passing budget. I think it's important to take care of our air quality no matter what. So would we be looking at using some fund balance to cover that in a non-passing budget?
Yeah, so Chris, $4.6 million of fund balance has already been assigned in this current budget. And we talked about that pretty extensively back in the September operation work group. If you go back and revisit that slide, $4.6 million of fund balance from last year has already been budgeted for this year. Okay. So those investments are COVID investments. At least $2.6 million of that is directly COVID. $1.6 million alone in fund balance has been carried over and distributed to schools. That was intentional. That was early budget planning we all did together based on purchases that we knew schools would need. So their schools funding through carryover from last year through fund balance, schools have higher budgets than they've ever had because of the carryover we allotted from fund balance. $1.6 million worth. Schools have authority to distribute resources to supplies and needs of schools and needs of kids in programming at the local level. It's difficult from a central office high level to make decisions district-wide when individual teachers, individual classrooms need different resources. That is the reason we gave schools $1.6 million back in July, okay? Secondly, we have $1 million of COVID investments already built into the COVID schedule and the slide that I'll get to once we get back to the presentation. That has been allocated out of fund balance already for the technology, the virtual learning, all the infrastructure needs we have of the school district. In addition, we have carryover funds from TID 25 and the safety and security money that we've seen in the past and this board has seen. So we're already using a pretty significant amount of fund balance, more than I've ever seen, and an assigned fund balance to get us through this current year. If we were to assign any more fund balance at this point, we do need to be incredibly careful about using fund balance for ongoing reoccurring purposes. We've talked about that before. We can't use one-time money for ongoing sources. So if kind of what you're asking is after this budget is approved and if an emergency comes up in January, can we use fund balance because we're in an emergency? Sure, we can. And it's an adjustment to the budget, and we would have to go through all the necessary steps that revising a budget is with DPI. There's a process for that if you revise the budget after the October budget. Typically, that would be for an emergency. As we allocate funds, the $2.6 million in the passing budget, we'll have to decide, where that is best suited based on the particular needs and maybe where the fundraising efforts come in. But if you're looking to make additional budget decisions after the October vote, I would look to the budget amendment process to make that decision. If there's an emergency and we overspend certain accounts, that happens from time to time. But I would not be relying on fund balance to make those kind of decisions in the future. That would just be bad budgeting.
I agree that we're trying not to use fund balance for recurring expenses, but I just want to make sure that the budget we pass in a couple weeks gives us the flexibility we need to be sure that our schools are very safe and our classrooms are very safe when we go back in some form at some point this year, which hopefully will at least get some of our kids back. I would rather see us assign a little bit of extra fund balance and not use it, knowing that we had it there in case we needed it to make sure that we're in a safe situation for all of our kids, rather than have to go back and go through the DPI process to get to a safe place. So I would lean towards assign a little bit of extra fund balance. If we don't use it, we don't use it. We can unassign it. The board has the ability to do that. So I just want to make sure that we've got the flexibility we need to make sure that our schools are as safe as possible when we go back.
Absolutely. That'll be the highest priority on all of our radar. And as we continue to go along, we review every single month where our expenditures are, and within the broad categories of which we can repurpose. We always do that. We did it in the spring, and we could do it again this December and January as well.
Thanks. So my second area that I wanted to make some comments and ask some questions is around compensation. I'm really glad to see that we were able to build steps back into the budget and provide our staff with the back pay that they need. As others have said, our staff are doing so much right now. They're working incredibly long hours. They're shifting all of their teaching to the virtual learning environment, and we need to make sure that they know how much we appreciate that through compensation. So I'm really glad we got steps back in the budget. I think we need to own that for an awful lot of our staff, anybody who's not on a STEP schedule or anybody who's been here for longer than 7 years, STEPs plus a 0.5 base wage increase does not get them to the rate of inflation, because STEPs after 7 years is usually 0.8 or 0.9. So we're not quite getting to inflation for all of our staff, particularly our longer term staff, but I'm just saying that is something that we need to own as a board, not arguing for anything at the moment because we can't talk about base wage right now. I am wondering, Another way of thanking our staff for all that they're doing is, and this is not necessarily budgetary, and we might need to come back to it later, but can we look at working conditions as a way that we can tell our staff how much we appreciate them? During the pandemic specifically, I've heard that a lot of our staff are very concerned about educator effectiveness evaluation. Staff are saying that because of technology gaps, they have an awful lot of students who need to be at the center of our equity efforts and need, and they know that they're being evaluated on centering those students in our equity efforts, but a lot of them aren't engaging in ways where it's easy to evaluate that work because, for whatever reason, they can't turn their camera on at home or they may not have reliable internet connections. So staff are concerned that, the connections and the centering of equity that they want to be doing in their educator effectiveness work, they're not able to do in the virtual environment to the degree that they want to. I'm also hearing that it's very hard to build relationships with students on Zoom. It's very hard to tell if you're being an effective teacher on Zoom. Reflection is a challenge. And it's very hard for staff to collaborate with each other the way that they would like to in the virtual environment. So for all of those reasons, I would actually like to put in a request that we do another DPI waiver and waive educator effectiveness and the other staff evaluation requirement just during COVID, not permanently by any means, just to take that little extra piece of stress off of our staff and to allow them to put the time that they feel like is going into educator effectiveness not in a very productive way and put it into making sure the virtual learning works as best as staff can for all of our kids. So I would just like to put that out there because that is something the board has the power to do. We could put in another DPI waiver to waive educator effectiveness and improve working conditions for our staff during the pandemic.
Yeah, Sherry, I think we're off topic here, so I look to you to decide if we need to respond to that.
You are correct, Kelly. That wasn't on the agenda for tonight. So if the board wants to take that up, they'll have to bring it up on another agenda for another meeting.
I would like to see that on a future agenda. So I'll put that out there. Thanks. Finally, I had a question about the $1 million in cuts at central office. Kelly, thank you so much for offering to get us a list of positions that have been cut just so we can see where there might be concerns with cuts impacting the ability of central office to work. I just wanted to get a clarification for anybody who's looking at the DPI budget and looking at the administrative line there versus central office. Central office, we cut $1 million. If you look at the administrative budget in the DPI worksheet, the budget actually went up about 14%, although it's a very small dollar amount. So just what's the difference between central office and the DPI budget line for administration?
Sure. So administration would include principals, for example, assistant principals, for example. Any one of those salary lines would increase once the board as I suggested, we've put steps and lanes back in. Steps and lanes are across the district. They're not just for teachers. It's our HR way of working. So steps would be in there as well. You're also going to have in that particular line item healthcare increases. Healthcare went up across the board, even with the good decisions kind of that we made and all the related WRS, FICA, and all those additional expenses. They all come into salary. I can get you a formal definition of the district administration and the school administration lines. If those are the two lines you're looking at, it would be right on the DPI website.
That would be really helpful. I noticed that like most of our personnel type line items went up 3 or 4%, but admin went up 14. So I was just kind of curious, like if there were other items in there that would be driving it up. I know that admin was already paying into their health insurance, so there wasn't a savings there like there was for the rest of our staff.
That's right.
Okay.
They're at 12%.
Ananda, I see your hand.
Just 2 comments. One, I feel like I have brought this up too around like a stipend on technology. That actually I feel like rather than a reimbursement, it's just like people can just use that money however way that they feel appropriate. I would be in support of that as well. my only other comment is we are approaching 2 hours, and I'm just wondering, I think we have one more presentation on the doc. So I'm wondering if we can take like a quick stretch break, or what's happening from a human.
Yeah, I'd like to get through the rest of my slides before we take a break, if that's possible. Also want to make sure everyone realizes that any type of a stipend or a payment like that is taxable on the teacher's aspect. Whereas if principals were to purchase what teachers need, it would be non-taxable.
Thanks,
Are
Kelly.
there any other comments on expenditures? All right, we have COVID and taxes to talk about, and Kelly, take it away.
All right, Barb, can you pull the slides back up? All right. So we've already talked about how our CARES Act funding just isn't enough. At this point, we've received about $8.5 million available for 3 school years, 19-20, 2021, and 21-22. Showing on this slide is the allocation for the 2021 budget, which is by far and away where we've put the majority of the funding we've received from the federal government into. In addition to that, I've already mentioned $1 million of carryover out of fund balance, along with $1 million of reallocated funding from within our current budget to make $2 million in addition available for the COVID-related budgets. And in the passing budget, we just saw on a previous slide, $2 million set aside for the larger project needs as well. So I think we spent a lot of time talking about this already tonight. So I'll go on to the next slide and get into the tax impact, which is good news coming our way. We've been able to rerun some new projections based on information coming from the state, along with our own information on cost of spending per pupil for the 19-20 school year. And at this rate, our updated projections are a 5% increase in general aid. But if we go to the next slide, I want to be very clear on what general aid is and what it means. An increase in state general aid does not mean new revenue. It does not mean we have ability to fund anything more than we've otherwise spoken about. What general aid is the amount of funding the state puts into the revenue limit to decrease property taxes. It is entirely a property tax reduction tool. It is not anything that affects revenue limit. So as general aid increases, it's very good news for our local taxpayer that the cost of this budget on the local taxpayer will decrease with thanks to the state. And that effect will happen on the referendum as well, which I'll get to in just a minute. So the reasons why, as I just mentioned, are one, on a typical year for the last 5 years, we've been outspending our average districts around us on a cost per pupil, largely driven by salary or expenditures at the local rate. This year, because of our savings in the spring, the central office positions that were put on hold back in April, we generated more savings than some of our surrounding school districts in the spring. For example, a large saving item for us was in transportation. Being a large entity here in Madison, we were able to negotiate many of our contracts in the spring and able to get many of our funding back. So in transportation, we saved $1.6 million in overall negotiations that would have otherwise been left on the table. But by negotiating that and many, many other contracts, my office spent 2.5 weeks renegotiating contracts after COVID when we closed down, just contract after contract looking to get all of our funding back. That paid off. It paid off by a lower cost per student at the end of the year, and ultimately paid off for the local taxpayer in increased state aid and decreased mill rates. So when you look at the next slide, one other moving part in our favor is the equalized property value. So back in June, we projected 5%, slower growth than we've seen some of the past years on equalized property value, but positive growth nonetheless. was our expectation for the June property values. And we just got the Department of Revenue letter just last week. And our final number is 5.75%, which is good news. It means that the base is bigger so that the revenue limit or the revenue from the revenue limit gets dispersed on a larger base. So again, no new revenue coming out of this, no new money, but really good news for the local taxpayer because it means we've got a bigger base to spread the overall levy across. So great news on both of those fronts on the taxpayer front. And the next slide kind of summarizes for you how we've gotten to where we are on our new tax projections moving towards the end of the year. So the 1920 mill rate, or which would be in place right now, is $11.10. In the non-passing budget world, the budget you approved in June had a 40% decrease, 40 cent decrease on the mill rate in what you approved in June. It had that 5% property value growth, which helped to spread out the costs. But largely, that mill rate reduction was because of the $8 million in budget you all cut to balance this budget. So as the state puts on revenue limits that don't keep up with inflation, it forces districts to cut the budget, which forces the district to drop property taxes. It's the entire reason the revenue limit doesn't keep pace with inflation, because it's a tool being used at the state capitol to lower property taxes. And in fact, that's what is happening in the non-passing budget that you passed in June. But on a positive aspect, the state aid then comes in and says the state's going to pick up a little bit bigger of a bill than we had anticipated, and that property value growth is a little bit better than we had anticipated, which further allows the mill rate to decrease. So in the 2021 budget and a non-passing budget, that estimated mill rate is now $10.53, or a 5.1% decrease for the mill rate. And an overall decrease for the average homeowner by $61 in their property tax bill on that non-passing budget. In the referendum, it has some of the same impacts. So the budget you passed in June, the referendum would have looked like a 30-cent increase to the current mill rate. And those would be the numbers that we've been talking about when we've been in our referendum meetings, since July. But since then, just in these last weeks, we learned about this general state aid and the property value growth, which brings down the overall cost of the passing referendum, both the operating and the facilities together. Should they pass, that estimated mill rate is now $11.11, or a 1 cent mill rate increase, less than a 1% increase in the mill rate. And for the average homeowner, it brings down this year's cost for both questions, should they pass, to be $120 for this current year. Otherwise thought of as $10 a month is what the referendum would cost the average taxpayer if both should pass. The next slide is kind of like an updated talking point referendum slide for your use. I know we're just about done with all of our referendum sessions, but should you need it, it's there. And last but not least, the DPI summary table, which is all the kind of hardcore financials that people like to look at for our total levy by fund, how it changes for our base revenue, which is our non-passing revenue, how it changes for our passing referendum if both questions should pass, and then that average home value, the bill, and the change from the prior year. So I know people like to look at those level details. It's in here, and it's in the draft DPI budget, which is attached. But as a reminder, these are all draft numbers. We do not have final state aid. And as good as our projection is, I highly doubt we have it down to the dollar. So at least minimally, these numbers are going to change because of the state aid numbers. We also have not received our 2X charter numbers. So that has the potential to change our budget yet too. Those are two key open items. There's always a couple other things that might surprise us at the end of the year that we haven't seen yet that we might get later on this week. But certainly those are the two that we're kind of waiting for from the state. But this is what we know to date. And Chris, other than next steps, we're pretty much good. So next steps are, again, waiting for that information this week. Make final budget balancing based on what we learned from the state the week of the 23rd to get you a draft budget book, budget books, a passing and a non-passing version ready for your approval on October 26th. So that's what I have for you all tonight.
Thank you, Kelly. Before we launch into any final remarks or questions, I want to thank Kelly and her team, both not just for this presentation, but also for a lot of really good news for taxpayers. The work that you did this spring to control our costs and get savings where we could get them is going to lower our tax bill, both in a passing and non-passing scenario, based on, below projections that we had earlier. So thank you for that work. It's really important, and grateful for your work on this budget. Any final questions about taxes, COVID? What should board members do if they have questions about the budget between when your final numbers come out and the October 26th meeting? And likewise, if anybody has an idea for a budget amendment, what should they do?
So there's not an open time period for budget amendments at this point in time. If you have any questions or want to talk through anything as it relates to preparing for the end of the month, you should put it in writing and send it to the Chief of Staff and myself, CCing your fellow board members so that they can see the questions you're asking. And so everyone is kept in the loop, of course, just CCing board members so that we don't talk over email, but any questions that you have, you would send to me and the Chief of Staff, and we'll get you a timely response. If you are thinking about a budget amendment, the typical process would be that you reach out to your board president.
Ollie?
Kelly, I want to thank you for this kind of updated information, particularly the slide that indicated where we're at in terms of mill rate and the really sophisticated breakdown of the expense to the average homeowner in Madison. I think it's important to really emphasize that we still know that $120 is a lot to a lot of families right now. And simultaneously, all the work that has gone into making this as affordable as possible, and what we'll continue to do to make really complex and really intelligent decisions around the financial well-being of our district and our community in consideration of, the fact that this is real folks who are talking about, added expense at a time of crisis. And so I think we have a tremendous level of gratitude towards you, Kelly, for championing this work and bringing greater and greater clarity to this process, and also to our community for showing up to support our schools. And so I guess if there is any way that you can expand on that conversation or speak to the long-term impact of mill rate for the years to come as it informs the referendum, I think it would be incredibly helpful to enhancing the knowledge of folks who are going to be voting in November or are already voting.
Sure. So that equalized property value is a pretty big deal for our overall tax impact calculations moving forward. So 5.75% increase not only makes the referendum more affordable this year, it makes the referendum more affordable for the next 4 years. Because it's a bigger base that's built in. We've already built into the referendum projections a slower growth rate due to COVID-19. The referendum projections include a 1% growth rate for next year. So any growth rate that's better than that would increase the overall cost of this referendum and the estimates that have been put forward today. But the increase in just this year makes the future years more affordable. And the state aid, it's really hard to predict at this point how that's going to help in future years. Hopefully we have turned a corner and we will start to see more state aid in future years, which would reduce all of these costs on the local property tax owner and would probably have the biggest impact on the future. But it is really hard to project that at this point in time. So I've done no calculating to even come up with estimates for the future, because it's really hard to tell if this year is just a blip because of COVID and some of the tough decisions we made, versus if it's related to consistent good budgeting that this board has made over the last couple of years to reduce costs, cut that $17 million out of the last 5 years that we've talked about. It's also possible that is catching up, and we've started to turn positively catching up, and we've started to turn a corner with state aid, but it's just too early to tell. We'll know more next year.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Kelly. Can you speak to that in pairing that with kind of lower interest rates and how that will also reduce costs long-term for taxpayers?
Absolutely. So that's specific to the facilities referendum. The facilities referendum is a bond, just like if you were to take out a mortgage on your home. And the interest rate that you get matters a lot, just as if you were to take out a mortgage on your home. So right now we're seeing historically low interest rates. And if we were to go to market by December or January and get better rates, then we built into our projections, the overall cost of the referendum comes down as it relates to the impact to the average homeowner. So we have 4% and rising built into the budget right now. If we were to receive a 2.5% rate, for example, you could see something like $20 million in interest come off the table over the next 20 years because it's a 20-year bond, just like your home. But that, is a big impact on homeowners moving forward. So you could see 5 to 10 cents coming off this mill rate impact over time. We don't know that now. It's just looking at the market of where it's today, what we may be able to get based on our really positive credit rating.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Kelly. And Chris, thank you so much for your facilitation of this meeting.
Any last comments? All right, well, I guess the question of the moment is, do we take a 5-minute bathroom break or do we just try to power through the next part of the presentation? It's brief. Kelly, is 4 or 5 slides, I think.
It is brief. I'm happy to do however you like.
We just power through it.
Yeah, let's just try to power through it. That's my vote. So
all right,
let's go into virtual learning update related to operations.
All right, as Barb's pulling up that slide, I just want to kick it off by really celebrating the great work of our team. Our team consisting of kind of Karen Kepler, Deirdre, Andrew Statz, Chad Weezy, Sally Zerbaldanovich, Jay. I'm missing a couple others, but on the operational side of the house, a lot of work has been happening and continuous improvement is happening by the week. So it's not just happening, quarter 1 to quarter 2. By the week, people are ebbing and flowing to make new decisions and new movements that support kids. Barb, go ahead and go to the next slide. So the purpose of tonight is just to give you an update on that work. We'll start by having Sally update you on the great work our nurses have been doing in support of MSCR Cares, which is the foundation of our lessons learned and the documents and processes and procedures we're putting into place. When we can get kids back in the building, we will be ready for the work of the individuals you're about to hear in front of you. So Sally will get us started. We'll move through Chad and a couple items in his world, and we'll follow up with next steps. But Chris, I agree, this does not need to be long. Our team is ready to give you the high-level talking points. So Sally, why don't you take us away? Barb, next slide, please.
Okay, thank you everyone for having me here today. I'm going to give you an update on health and safety. First off, just a huge thank you to all the departments we're working with, MSCR, special education, HR, communications, and so many others to make this health and safety work be effectively implemented. So, first off, I would like to just talk to you about our mitigating factors and looking at how we are promoting mask wearing, physical distancing, and hand washing. That work is happening in all of our schools, and it's happening very well. However, I think we're learning that this is not a one and done business, that this is work that needs to be continually being worked on. So we continue to work with our staff in our buildings to make sure that they understand and we offer empathy that it's not easy to be wearing masks for that time period, but that is a continual process of improvement in working with that. Also would like to mention the symptom screener. We're working closely with HR. This is an electronic system that is being utilized more and more every day, and it's really helping us with our contact tracing. And it's a very effective way of doing this work. Also, I just would like to mention that it's an ever-changing landscape for COVID-19, and we are really doing follow-up and extensive contact tracing. Our nurses they're really doing a phenomenal job in both our MSCR CARES program and special ed program, and making sure that there's follow-up for staff and students who are symptomatic, close contacts, and positive for COVID-19. I'm happy to say we have, for our PPE supply, we are doing very well with that, and we have are prepared whenever to return to school. We have plenty on board. We've also worked out a partnership with Badger Bus. If we have sick children, with the consent of the parent, that they can be sent home. We're also just continually working with our with communications. We're developing a kind of a standardized process for contact tracing that we will share with the principals, and that they will know what those procedures are for now and when we return, so that it will be very systematic and flow very smoothly. I continue, and so does Jay and a few other of our team members, to meet with UW Peds and some other UW partners, and seeing how we can do more screening, surveillance screening, and COVID-19 screening with our staff. I know that Dr. Wald is starting to work more with the Department of Health Services and Governor Evers, and seeing if there are tests available that schools could be offered. So that's kind of exciting work, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. We're continually hiring. And that is going fairly well. So appreciate all the help from HR with that. And just a resounding thank you to our public health department here in Madison. If it weren't for them, I think we'd be in a lot more worse shape than we are now. Our state is really struggling, but I just heard today that Dane County and one other county are really only 2 counties in the whole state where there's a downward trajectory with number of cases. So that was good news. And so again, just thanks to everyone who is helping us do this hard work, really, but good work, and work that can be done in promoting the health and safety of our students and staff as we return back to work in our buildings.
Thank you so much, Sally.
Barb, next slide. Chad Weezy.
Hi there. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Kelly. I've got a quick update on food service facilities and technology. First, food service. I think as many of our board members are aware, Kelly already mentioned this in the budget update. We did end up with a USDA waiver provided through the end of the school year, which was good news for our budget, and also really good news for families in terms of just ease of kind of getting this valuable resource to all of our students that need food and nutrition. I certainly wanted to lead this off by thanking our food service staff and Steve Youngbauer as we've continued to work together to kind of push the envelope on ways to get healthy and fresh and local and nutritional meals to all the students that need them. We kind of started from scratch this fall and made the decision that we wanted to turn that 16,000 number that you see on the bottom left of that slide that we were averaging on a weekly basis in the spring. And we wanted to do much better. We wanted to get to as many families and students as we could. So we ended up just kind of redoing our entire approach. We are now serving meals at 40 different remote pickup locations and have gone with a week's worth of meals at one food drop. So 10 meals, 10 breakfasts and, 5 breakfasts and 5 lunches in each box we're delivering. And we're really happy with our results, but also not kind of resting on our laurels, continuing to look for places to improve. So our fall averages are all the way up to over 50,000 meals a week. So we more than, we're on our way to and more than tripling the numbers we served in the spring. Continuing to work with families, in particular in certain attendance areas where we feel like we could be doing better with meal distribution by sending sporadic text reminders, continuing to make sure that newsletters are updated, coordinating with principals and community partners to continue to make sure we get the word out in terms of the availability of these nutritional meals. And we just started a new pilot last week where we're partnering with Badger Bus, our transportation provider, and we actually worked closely with Andrew's department and identified certain neighborhoods that we felt needed this service all the more. And we started last week by taking boxes of meals on Badger buses and literally running almost a school bus route where we stop every second or third block. We communicate with families around the bus schedule, and families simply need to make it to the curb like they would for a bus stop, and we hand a meal right out of the bus. And had a really good first week where we were averaging an additional 700 meals by just running 2 buses. So we will likely expand that going through the fall and into the winter, where we know it will actually get a little bit harder for families to maybe even get out to one of these 40 sites when the weather gets bad. So we're excited about that. And like I said, continuing to make sure that we've got an improvement mindset to get these meals to as many students as possible. Next slide. In the world of kind of building services and physical safety, also continued work there. As Sally mentioned, we've had pretty good luck with PPE, and Sally and I have been partnering to make sure we get orders in and have an adequate supply of PPE for our students and have stockpiled for in the event when we start to scale up for more students back in the buildings. Worked closely with Sally's department and human resources on contact tracing. We've utilized our new access control system to make sure we monitor exactly who's in buildings every day. And have an updated system where if you're in a building, you get an automatic email the very next morning to have you do a symptom screener and continue to have reminders on safe and appropriate ways to be coming back in our building if you have any symptoms that would be precursors to potential COVID. We're doing another round of protective barriers. So our carpenters are going back through buildings and doing another round of plexiglass shields. Where we maybe kind of the secondary areas where we know we can continue to add plexi barriers. So that work's ongoing. The board approved a shipment of filters at a previous regular board meeting. Those have begun to come in and we're installing those in buildings. We have already gone through and updated all of the controls on the air handling side to maximize fresh air. More and more as research comes in, they are continuing to say that if anything, that is the most important thing we can do is to make sure we continue to have fresh air exchanges in these classroom settings. And we're doing that. We're actually flushing the building before staff and students come in, and we're doing the same at the end of the day. Only other thing, I guess, next steps, continue with the filtration installation as supplies become available. And then we are actually installing some HEPA filters in all of our nurses areas around the district. Board also approved that purchase. Next slide. In the world of technology, we've continued to have mechanisms in place to support families in the event of either internet issues or having device issues. So we have set up drive-up, what we're calling hubs on the east and west side, one at Memorial and one at La Follette, that if a family has a Chromebook crash even during the day, we have staff available to swap one out immediately. If a family can't get to school, we are actually continuing to deliver these devices on buses. We've had good success with the hotspots, but certainly wanted to make sure the board was aware if anything is crossing your desk. If any of you have used hotspots before or tethered a cell phone, it is dependent on the strength of your connection, essentially cellular connection. So we've continued to problem solve with families that may be in an area where the cellular connection is not all that great. To get students to an exterior wall, potentially utilize some of our high range antennas, potentially get them enrolled in MSCR CARES programs, and just continue to problem solve around internet connectivity. We continue to have dialogue with the city of Madison. I just presented to their technology committee last month on this ongoing issue that is certainly much greater than the school district can solve. This is a nationwide issue that has kind of legal and bureaucratic red tape tied to it. And we know it's a complex issue that we are going to continue to make sure we take head on and do whatever we can as a school district to solve. We are exploring the possibility of limited wired connections to some of our housing complexes where maybe we can get a wired connection into a common space where we're having Khajiit issues. Continue to collaborate with outside agencies to problem solve this issue. We are excited that we're getting a fiber connection to the Allied Learning Center. This has been an ongoing issue. The board has previously approved expenditures in the past around continuing to have our physical assets, our 50 sites connected to the Madison Unified Fiber Network. And that's a good thing. Allied, we've been pushing hard for a couple of years. The city finally approved it, and we are working on the permits to get that fiber tied into Allied, which will exponentially increase their bandwidth at Allied Learning Center. That may be it for me. Next slide. I think Kelly was maybe going to go through next steps, and then I think we're certainly available for questions if we have them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chad and Sally, for your great update. We will continue to improve in all areas of operations as we see and identify areas that can be fixed. You can count on that from our team. We continue our ongoing commitment to getting two-way communication on our process moving forward from external subject matter expertise, not only from the Department of Health, but our own parents who are doctors and have information and help to share. And we will maintain an operational role as the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on reopening continues underway. Dr. Jenkins, do you have anything for closing remarks?
Yes, let me just say this particular team. First, let me speak to the operation part in your role, Kelly, and leading that part. The finance is just beautiful. And the whole team supporting that, from the academic team to everyone else, Andrew's work, everyone, the show. In this particular team, I just tell you, I've been so proud of the work that you guys have done and you're continuing to do, and how serious you're taking your work. Sally, the nurses and the social workers, their effort in terms of trying to keep us all safe during this time, I cannot say it enough, but just the leadership and what you see Chad doing from his end and Jay doing from his end as well, it's just been really something we can rest our head on and saying that this is something we're doing well, exceptionally well. When you go from 16,000 meals a week to 50,000 meals a week, and Chad stopped short of saying he's even working with community partners to get meals out to our kids, not just in the 40 sites, just for our schools as we know it, but if our children are anywhere within the city, he's gone the extra effort to do that. And Sally, the work that you're doing, our people don't brag on themselves, so I'm going to take this opportunity to brag on them. We have some of the best people doing this work that you can find, and I just say I can't be prouder just being here, being a colleague with these individuals. And I want the board to know that, and everyone else to know we have an excellent team doing this particular work during COVID, keeping the social-emotional, keeping the food need, keeping all of the whole child and the whole family in mind. Thank you guys for this work. I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chris, I think we're good. Barbara, if you want to take the slides down. And any questions?
I just want to reiterate how amazing it is that you have more than tripled the number of meals that we're serving since spring. And not only that, but we're still participating in programs like the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program to ensure that the quality of the food is there. And the work that has gone into spatial analysis to make sure that we're getting food to the neighborhoods where the need is greatest is really impressive. So thank you so much for making sure that we're taking care of our families and our children in many ways. Ollie?
Yeah, I think it's such a great update to hear what we're doing to strengthen access to the internet for our young people and to create sites in which our young people can engage with virtual learning to the full extent. I also think it's really important anytime we have Sally on just to say thank you. So thank you so much for all the work you're doing to make sure that our kiddos are safe and our faculty are safe. It is so important to the work that we're doing right now and to the trust of our community to be able to look to your leadership. So we cannot thank you enough.
Any other final comments or remarks? Chris?
Yeah, thank you for all this work. And I just want to say to our families and our staff out there, we continue to recognize the challenges of virtual learning and the challenges of not all students being able to be in our schools, and know that it really is a priority for us to try to continue to support our school communities in the best ways that we can, and to really work on getting students back to school when it is safe to do so. Working on those metrics still. And so I guess, the big question is when students and families will know, about our decision for the next quarter and our process for going forward.
Yes, I could speak to that in terms of by the end of the week. We're going to have a communication out. Andrew's been leading the team since last spring in terms of looking at various things, and we're considering everything from public health, UW Health, but public health, following the science behind it and our ability to be able to deliver the safest environment for our students and for our staff and for our parents to return to. And we have too been watching very closely, as has everyone else, but we meet, as you heard, with our advisory team internal. We've added external. We also added external to our team, the principal group, MTI, additional parents. We have the medical team that we've been working with, and we're going to make this decision by the end of the week. Everyone will know exactly where we are based upon what metrics are there in place. But we wanted to make an announcement, not just about where we're going to be next term, but we also want to make an announcement to say that we've listened to our students, to our staff, to our parents, to refine where we are to do a better job right now. We're getting a lot of positive comments about we're better than where we were last spring, but we also heard the part about early learning, special ed, and some of those other things like this, DLI, that we're adjusting in real time. We're going to meet next Wednesday with the entire district in terms of with the leadership team, MTI, the principal groups, to kind of let everybody know in terms of where we are and how we're going to respond to the things that we've been hearing. And then we'll talk about not only second term, but what's our hopes for third, as you've heard that being alluded to. But we will have to say that this is a health crisis. We're trying to follow as much as possible the recommendations of keeping everyone safe first. Even in the few outbreaks that we've had, we've responded to them. I mean, just spot on and doing what we need to do to make sure that this doesn't continue to spread. You heard, I think it was you, Chris, may have said that Dane County is one of the counties, and I know in my conversation with public health, we've seen the least amount of increase at UW over the last 2 weeks for the first time. So, but we still know we're very high in our area. So by the end of the week, everyone's going to know where we are, and then also those things that we're doing to make it better.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And yeah, I wanted to say a quick thank you to Sally for that little glimmer of hope when, the news out of Wisconsin hasn't seemed very good for a while, to hear that Dane County is, if those rates are starting to come down, that is a little glimmer of hope. So thank you for that.
Nikki, did I see your hand?
No, I was stretching.
Okay. Other comments? All right. Well, it's really good to know that when it's safe for our kids to go back, our schools will be safe. That's the focus we've got here. So I think we can adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second, Ali Muldrow.
Thanks, Ollie. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.